So let's talk about structured data. As Taco said, we have some time at the end for questions. I don't think this is going to be super long, and I figure you folks probably have lots of stuff you want to know. So definitely use the question function, ask away, upvote good questions, and we will get to those at the end, and we'll have plenty of time to explore. But first, let's set the scene a little bit. So hopefully everybody is generally familiar with WordPress, and hopefully you're generally familiar with Yoast SEO and what we do in that. So we won't spend too much time starting on that, but we will start right from the very beginning. We're going to look at what are rich results. That's what we're here to talk about. What is structured data? What is their relationship? I'm going to introduce you briefly to schema.org, which is some of the technology and language that powers these things. We're going to talk about what Yoast SEO does for you in that context and in those relationships. I'm going to give you some tactics that you can use, which is pretty awesome. And then, yeah, we'll have plenty of time to go on some Q&A and get some questions. So starting from the beginning. Apologies if this is pretty basic, but it's good to have the foundation and see where we're coming from in order to know where we're going and why it's important. So the way that Google fundamentally works and the way that they discover and evaluate content and the way that they read information and understand things and make decisions and power the rankings and all those things is they essentially crawl the web. They follow links. They look through content they find on pages, they evaluate it, they extract information, and they try and work out what those pages are about. They try and evaluate the quality. They try and determine which types of queries and questions that content should rank for and how good it is versus other pages on the web. And they try and guess a bit, they try and read a bit, they try and understand what types of content and entities does this page talk about and make decisions based on all of those factors.
SEO is the route to sustainable online success and growth. Learn SEO from the experts at Yoast SEO Academy. Our practical online courses help you on your SEO journey. The courses are packed with actionable tips for beginners and experts, fun quizzes, and much more. Start learning and ranking today.
And they use that understanding and the information they extract and the decisions they make to give us something like this. As a user, I can perform a search, I can enter a keyword, I can ask my devices a question, and I get a series of results. And they look typically something like this, a series of options ranked in a certain order. Except this is a bit of an oversimplification, because increasingly those results look less like a list of links that I have to choose from and more like something like this. This is much more like the Google results that we get for many of our search queries today. These are a mix of tools and widgets and cards and overviews and utilities and interactive things and answers to our questions. These are all scenarios where Google has used its understanding of the question that the user asked and all the information that's extracted from the web to try and solve that user's problem. And whilst many of these examples are mobile-sized and mobile-centric, many more of the experiences we're getting are look like this on desktop too. The desktop experience resembles this kind of transformation. And in addition to these types of examples, you've probably seen, and maybe not even noticed, but seen increasingly specific results formats for things like this. These are knowledge panel results, and these increasingly show up next to your search results when you're searching for information about things like companies or people or products or movies or historical events or local businesses and so on. And these often include things like organizational details, locations, facts, and figures. For example, in our Yoast example here, next to the slightly more impressive Google example, fair enough, they're a bigger company than us, but you can see information about our founder, Joost de Valk, and you can see some snippets from Wikipedia and some information about our plugins and software and company and structure and founding dates. You can also expand some of those sections around how to install our software or where our headquarters are located. And these are all things which might influence how trustworthy a user perceives us to be. or how they might interact with us as part of our research process. These kinds of results can be hugely influential in how and where we're discovered as brands and websites, and whether users choose to engage with us or not. Okay, in addition to that, there are many other more specific formats that we're starting to see across the search results as well. And I've got a bunch of examples here. You can see things like products in the top left, where we have a star rating and a number of votes and a price and the stock status and some information about the product and its description and its name. Or questions with multiple answers from things like forums and Reddit and Q&A pages. I'm sure you've all seen examples of recipes, like in the lower left, where we can see a snippet of a video that has calorie counts and cooking times. And then more generally, things like reviews, again with star ratings, or videos with specific snips and clippets and subsections. And then really influentially, things like local business reviews. We can see here the example TG Hair Studio. I don't think that's a real example. It's from Google, but we can see it has an address and it has opening hours and a little button at the bottom that I can expand to see more information about reviews and policies and specialities and so on and so forth. And there are more and more of these types of results coming all the time. Increasingly, the landscape that we are competing in Google to be discovered, to be chosen, to be preferred, to stand out against our competitors, look less and less like lists of links and look more and more like these kinds of results and widgets and tools. The good news is you can influence some of this. It's hard to, and in many cases, you can't directly control all of it, but we can help Google to understand our businesses and our content and our services in ways which increase the likelihood of them using these kinds of results. And that's good because as a website owner or a manager or a marketer, your visibility in these formats might determine how likely you are to be chosen. You want to control how your brand or your product or your content is represented. And you want to find opportunities to outshine your competitors. You don't want to be leaving any of this to chance, because then maybe quite by accident, Google might show the wrong opening hours or get your logo wrong, or maybe you just don't show up at all. It's worth using every tool you have available to try and manage how you're represented here. Instead of just relying on Google to come to our sites and to guess what our content is about and to try and work it out from the text on the page, we can tell them specifically. We can add code to our pages which says, this is a web page, it's about a product. That product has a price and a stock level and delivery information and these images and these reviews and so on and so on. For example, I'd like you to take a look at this snapshot of a blog post from Yoast.com on the right-hand side. This is a relatively recent blog post I wrote back in July about internal search in WordPress. And as a human looking at this, you can intuit a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, this looks like a blog post. I've seen this sort of thing before. I understand what I'm looking at. I understand that there is a title and some breadcrumb navigation and a date and some comments and a tag that categorizes it. I understand that the big image at the top is a kind of featured representation of the story I want to tell. But Google, as a machine with machine limitations, has to do some guesswork. Their crawlers are smart, but there's a surprising amount of nuance in here. For example, I'm just accidentally scrolling my mouse wildly, sorry. For example, this is a web page, which is part of a website. And as a result of that, it has things like a name, a description, a URL, a language, a whole set of dates, not only the date it was published, but also the date it was last modified, for example. It has licensing information. It's copyright because it's part of a website that everything on there is copyright. It has a whole set of media. It has several images, a video. It has potential actions you can take. You can look at this. You can read it. You can comment on it. You can share it. There are things you can do here. Interesting. It was published by an organization called Yoast on the 14th of July, and that organization has legal information. It has a logo. It has social profiles. It has a number of employees. It has information about when and where and who founded it. We can go even deeper. It contains an article. You see, the web page is a subtly different thing from the article it contains. And that article was authored by a person, me, John O. Alderson. And that article has images, and I have a profile and a biography and areas of expertise and a date of birth and other URLs I have profiles on and an avatar and a job title, etc. We can go even further. This article is categorized in a specific section of our site. And to represent that, we have breadcrumb navigation. It has a relationship to the blog that contains it. It has related posts in the same category. It has significant links out to other parts of the site. And it has several comments. And each of those comments has a date, an author. That author has an avatar. There are relationships between those comments if some of them are responses to others. And imagine if we went even further, if this were, for example, a product page, it would also have a product with an offer, with a price, availability information, reviews, ratings, options, manufacturer info, SKUs, stock levels, etc. So if we're trying to optimize our websites and our content, we really need to do all the work we can to help Google to understand all of those specific points. Not all of that information is easy to intuit just by scraping the text from the page. So we can use these extra tools we have available to communicate this explicitly. We need to give Google a map. And I'm mentioning Google a lot specifically, but a lot of these rules and this logic applies to not only Google, but also Bing, also Facebook, Yandex, Yahoo, Baidu. Many of the systems which rely on this kind of information use the same kind of logic. You see, this kind of detail is hard for search engines and other systems to get right automatically. It is much easier if we map it out explicitly. So if we have a map that describes all the things on our pages, we say, here is an article, here is the author, and we describe the relationships between them, it removes all the chance that they get that wrong. This page was published by that organization. This author works for the same organization. Okay, there are relationships here which we can describe explicitly. Now we can join the dots and give Google a much better understanding of our content. We build those maps and describe our content using schema.org. Schema.org is a website and the standard. It's a kind of dictionary. It provides definition of all the different types of things that you might find on a website and the types of properties that those things might have. Here we're looking at how to describe an event, for example. We can see that an event might be about a topic, or it might have attendees or an audience. It might also have a director and a door time, for example, if it was a physical event. And for each of these types of things, whether it's an event or an article or an author or an audience, we can use code to describe them in a way which Google and others can understand. And whilst I don't want to focus too much on the coding side of this, it's worth looking briefly at an example. This is what some schema.org code might look like for describing a product. This could just as easily have been an event or a web page or an article or a person, but for now, let's look at this product example. This code is JSON-LD. That's a type of JavaScript. And yes, it looks a bit complex at first, but when you look at it line by line, you can see that all it's really doing is defining those schema.org properties. This is a product. Oops, I've just skipped for slide by accident again. My mouse is very sensitive today. This is a product that has a name of Executive Anvil. It has 3 images. It has a description. It has a brand, which is a thing called Acme. And we can see the beginning of some information about a series of reviews and ratings. When we put this code in our page, Google can understand it and use this to make sure that it gets our address right, to populate our knowledge graphs, and to make us eligible for rich results formats. I've just seen a question come in from Carrie, which is an excellent one, saying, what if you don't code at that level? Indeed, to whoever's responded to that, don't worry. I'll get to that in a moment. Don't worry at all. And there are really loads of different types of those types of things you can describe, not just events and audiences and all sorts, but for example, a person. And we can describe different properties of those things. For example, a person might have an email address, and we can see that that's a text field. But we can be much more sophisticated. For example, a person might have children, which are more persons, or a place of birth, which is a type of location, which might have a name and address, and so on and so forth. We can build out these maps of information. Let's look at a more practical example that might resonate a bit more closely to some of you folks. This is the schema.org page for describing a restaurant. And if you run a local business or have a business, even if it's not a local one, the same kind of thinking might apply to you. We can see, for example, that a restaurant is a type of food establishment, which is a type of local business. And if we have a restaurant, we can describe all sorts of interesting properties about it, like if it accepts reservations, or the type of cuisine it serves, or its opening hours. Now it's super easy for Google to digest that information and understand what type of cuisine we serve to our visitors. And they can show that in their search results. They can include it in Google Maps. They can use it to help better understand what types of results I should get for a voice search when I ask my phone what types of restaurants are nearby, and so on and so forth. The good news is, and I'm going back to Carrie's question, is what if you don't code at that level? The good news is you don't need to worry about any of the technical side of this. Because as long as you're running on WordPress and using the Yoast SEO plugin, we do a ton of this stuff automatically in the background. Literally a large part of my day job is making sure that you don't have to think about this or care about it. I want to show you an example using that same blog post. Here is the same blog post we were looking at just now. And if I skip forwards a slide, in the background, we secretly and invisibly do all of this stuff. This is just part of the schema markup that we output in the background of the page to make sure that we're describing all of this to Google. And you can see some examples here of where we're saying, okay, there is an organization called Yoast that publishes this website. There is a breadcrumb list. Here is the article. The article has a headline. It has an author who's named John Alderson, who is a person, and so on. You can just about make out some of the details in the background here. All of this happens automatically just because you've written a blog post. It has an author. It has comments. It's categorized in a certain way. We try and do all of that heavy lifting in the background to make sure that Google best understands what's going on. Let's change how we're looking at this, because this is a lot of code on the page and quite dense. There is a much nicer way of visualizing this so we can understand what's happening if you want to nerd out about this. I said this is about describing maps. That's very much a good way of thinking about it. This is a visualization of that same article and that same schema markup from a site called Classy Schema, which you can go and look at. You can plug your URLs into. You can see what it outputs. And this shows the entities we're describing, and it shows the relationships between them. If you look here, you can see I've highlighted in the middle, here is the article, and here is its relationship to the web page, and here is the relationship to the author that's a person. We can see those connections. And you can start to see some of those more complicated relationships that Google might struggle to work out on its own. Like the author is a person who is the same person who works for that organization that published the blog post. That nice little triangle of relationships is a really strong way of saying, please, Google, understand who this person is and all their relationships and all the important stuff. Pretty cool. You can also see some stuff like Yoast, the organization, is the copyright holder of Yoast, the website, and all of that nuance. Okay. Why should you care about any of this if we sort it automatically? As I mentioned, you really don't need to worry about the technical side because we take care of all the information from your site and construct all the stuff in the background. But there is only so much that we can do automatically. And if you really want to take full advantage of structured data and schema.org, we need some extra information from you. I'm going to show you 4 tactical things where you can really enrich and level up what this is doing just by feeding a bit more context and information in, places where you can do a tiny bit of work and some configuration to really turbocharge your schema data. That allows you to unlock additional rich results types, spruce up your search results, and make sure you're communicating clearly with Google. Number 1 is we have a fancy new feature if you're running a recent version of Yoast SEO called the configuration workout. Though actually the rumor mill says that we might change this at some point and name it and remove it. But for now, today's opportunity is go in and have a look at this and take advantage. Go into your site admin, find the Yoast menu and go to workouts. That will only show up if you're running a recent version. So if you can't find it, then you need to go update. There are a few workouts in there. The one we're interested in is called the configuration workout, and it will look, when you get into it, something like this. You may need to run some processes and stuff. You may get a warning saying you need to update your indexables and get your data up to date. Follow through those, read the text, tick the boxes, press the buttons. This is really straightforward. The bit we're interested in is telling us what your site is about. What is your site called? What is its tagline? And most importantly, what does it represent? Is this a site that is marketing a type of organization, Maybe it's for a restaurant, maybe it's for a corporation, or is it a site representing a person? Is it a personal blog about and for that individual? Why is it important that we configure this? Think back to the structured data we output. We said in one of the examples, this blog post is an article published by this organization and maybe written by that person. In order to know who that organization is and who that person is and all those relationships, and to understand that this organization is the same one who published this website and so on, we need to know who that organization is. This is a trivial 2-second job to say, hang the name of my company on the door so that when Google is extracting our schema data, they know which organization it is and we can understand that and join it all together. This is profoundly powerful. It's such a simple tweak and it unlocks a whole bunch of our more advanced optimizations in the background. Really, really cool. You can also, while you're in there, define your social profiles for your organization or for your person, depending on how you've configured that, so that we can reference those from your schema. That helps Google and other consumers to better understand the relationships between that. It can be quite helpful for Google and other consumers to say, okay, our website is yoast.com, our Twitter is @Yoast, our LinkedIn page is /whatever it is, organization /Yoast, and they can join the dots between those. And that can be really helpful in influencing things like this. You remember the knowledge graph earlier. Now, these values don't directly control this output, and Google changes some of the standards and specs around here sometimes, but it can be really helpful to reinforce and to send those signals saying, this is us, this is the same thing as us. Amanda's just asked a really interesting question, which I'll answer now because it's a fascinating one. If you have more than one name, does it allow us to include that? We don't in the interface, but I'll come on to a way you can do that manually. That's a really interesting use case. It'd be quite interesting to explore that. Okay, so number 2 is use our structured data blocks. If you want tactical opportunities, this is really where it's at. We have a whole bunch of features that you can use to enrich your results and to unlock specific types and formats. You have to be using the WordPress block editor, the Gutenberg editor, in order to be able to access these. There's a whole bunch of technical reasons why that's the case. It's just baked quite heavily into how these systems work. If you're still on the classic editor, I would urge you strongly to revisit and check out the Gutenberg block editor. It's changed and evolved a lot. It really is the future. And if you want to be competing with other sites building fancy, flashy stuff, you really have to be using the right technology. When you are using the block editor, you will get options like this. When you go to insert a new block, search for Yoast or search for structured data. At the moment, we have 2 blocks. We have FAQ blocks and how-to blocks. I know for a fact there are many more coming in the future and some really cool stuff. I've seen some comments in the chat earlier asking for certain types. I am not going to reveal anything, but definitely keep an eye on our roadmap and our release logs. This is really straightforward. You write an FAQ list. I have questions and answers. It works like a normal block. You craft your content, you apply your theme styling or custom CSS. You don't need to worry about any schema stuff. And then magically in the background, we produce a wall of code. Behind this, again, you don't need to worry about this, but behind the scenes, we take your FAQ content and we automatically inject things like, this is an FAQ page. Here is a series of questions and answers that just reflects the content in the page. Really cool. We also have, I mentioned, how-to guides. These types of things make you eligible for these kinds of rich results in Google. This is an example of a FAQ result and a how-to result. I'm just seeing some questions about Elementor and Divi. I think we work reasonably well with Elementor since one of the recent upgrades. Divi, not so much. There is a potential roadmap for that. Keep asking if you want that kind of support. Or use a different editor. I know that's a big ask, but it's quite hard to integrate with all of these things that work in different ways. It's also worth noting that using these rich results using these structured blocks doesn't guarantee you these types of rich results. You still have to have great content. You still have to answer the user's query, and you still have to have a great reputation and do all your other great SEO stuff, like having a great site structure. But it really, really does give you a high chance of getting these kinds of rich visual results, which is obviously great for discovery, for click-through, for ranking. One of the things I should have mentioned earlier, I saw a question, but I didn't answer it, is that somebody asking if using this will help your rankings. We should be really clear that structured data and schema will never influence where you rank. This is not a ranking factor. You will not rank higher, but you might rank in places that you couldn't otherwise have, like image results. You might get bigger, fancier, more interactive results and widgets like these examples, and you might stand out more than your competitors. Okay, number 3 is you're going to describe your pages. We had an example just now for how a restaurant schema is like a more specific type of local business schema. In the same way, some web pages might be more specific types of web page. For example, schema.org has specific rules for FAQ pages and contact pages and checkout pages and others. And you can also have more specific types of articles, for example, blog posts and so on. We have a setting in the Yoast SEO widget area, our post preview section, in your page and post editor in WordPress. There is a tab for schema, which comes with such fancy drop downs as these, which allows you to say, oh no, this is not a web page, this is a profile page, or this is a medical web page. Now, some of these options are a bit strange, but they're mapped specifically from the options available on schema.org, so you can be quite flexible and choose your own adventure here. Don't mark up stuff that your pages aren't, but do take an effort to say, okay, if I have a profile page or an about page, I should really go in and specifically say that that's what this is. Again, that will help Google to better understand what's going on and what your content is about. Cool. You can also do that at post type level. So you can go into your settings in Yoast and say, actually, I have a post type of invoice, or maybe a bad example, I have a post type of symptoms, all of which should be medical web pages. And you can just apply that across the board. Pretty straightforward. Okay, number 4. Whilst we're describing our pages, we should also describe our people. We have a whole bunch of settings. I think this might only be in Yoast SEO Premium. I would have to go check, but it's a damn good reason to upgrade anyway. We add a whole bunch of extra features and input options to the profile editor in WordPress for just you, if it's your blog, you as the individual author, or say you have a team of people who write or people you're writing about. You can provide information about them in their bios, things like what awards have you won? What languages do you speak? What are your areas of expertise? This kind of stuff all gets added to your schema output, which really helps Google and others to better understand who is this person, why are they relevant, why should I trust their content, and so on and so forth, in addition to tying up all of their social profiles. If you use and have authors in a meaningful way on your site, it's worth going through and populating all of these in order to reinforce that information. Cool. One secret extra, I said there were 4 things I would recommend. There were 5, but this one's a bit nerdy. I won't dwell too long on this, but if you want to do custom stuff and you want to go way beyond and outside of what we do, great. What we output is a kind of foundation, the stuff we can do universally and automatically without touching. Everyone's site is different. Everyone's business is different. Everyone's needs are different. You should be looking to customize and extend this if you have the resource. We have an API and a way methods and mechanisms of coding that make it super easy and super sophisticated to change what we output, to add to it, to remove it, to disable it, to integrate it, to convert it. And this works in both directions. You can change your own stuff, but also third-party plugins and themes and systems can work backwards and forwards and tie into this. Actually, the example on the right is code I wrote for my website. It looks a bit dense, but it's actually really straightforward. You can see again, line by line, I'm just saying for the name, set this, for the email address, set this. And this produces some really beautiful stuff. This is super nerdy, but you can just about make out, for example, here, just how richly I'm describing me as a person, that kind of pinky dot on the right. Look at everything that I'm telling Google about who I am, the things I've done. And yes, thank you, Taco. At the bottom there, you can see my relationship to my spouse, Sam Alderson. That's pretty cool. And that she also works for an organization called Yoast. All these things are connected. This is a really powerful way of helping search engines understand everything that I want to tell them. This is marketing. This is me managing the narrative about how external systems understand me and my story. This is really cool. Okay, that was a lot to digest. What should you do with this? Go and take this away and go and manage those settings, configure your configuration wizard, tailor your pages, populate your people. But if you want to learn more, definitely go look at Yoast Academy. This is our online learning portal. You might have come across it. We have a whole bunch of free courses and we have a whole bunch of premium courses. It's well worth signing up. It comes bundled with Yoast SEO Premium. This is only an ad because it's genuinely really good. You want the premium features and you want to learn about how to do all the SEO stuff, go and buy the bundle. Really cool. Yeah, we have some free courses for structured data for beginners, which covers some of this sort of stuff. You want to go really deep and become an expert, you can do the premium course about understanding some of the deeper mechanics. Awesome. That was longer than I thought it might be. Thankfully, we still have some time for questions. I think Taco might rejoin us now while I take a deep breath and a sip of water. And then we can go through and see 26 questions. You still have time to upvote some of the popular ones? Hi, Taco. You're right.
Definitely. There's 27 now. Before we go into questions and to give people a quick break to take a breath after this storm of information that you've been giving us, there is a green button at the bottom of your screen. It's somewhere over here, I guess, that says register for the free Yoast SEO Academy. So to learn the basics, that's where you go. And because we're Yoast, it's all for free. All right, questions. The most upvoted question is, hey, Yoast, I noticed Yoast gives a red flag for not putting the keyword phrase from the title H1 in H2 or H3, but I've been told this is overkill and we shouldn't do this. So this is more of a general SEO question, Jono.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, so done badly, this could be definitely overkill. I can definitely imagine a page about blue widgets that says blue widget in every heading on the page, and I would tear my hair out trying to read it. You should definitely be more sophisticated than that. And there are ways to do that. In fact, in Yoast SEO Premium, you can define a whole bunch of synonyms and plurals and variations of your key phrase and use that. Generally, I would, there's a balance to be found between really nailing the SEO optimization and making sure that what you're writing is good and accessible. We always say, don't chase the green dots and the green flags for the sake of being perfect. Write the stuff that's good and right. However, if you're writing a page about blue widgets and your headings throughout the page don't mention blue widgets, you've probably strayed off topic, or you're probably not answering the kinds of questions that people have. You could imagine it would make sense to have a section about what type of blue widgets do you sell? What are the benefits of blue widgets versus red widgets? There are scenarios where you can do that elegantly and gracefully without it looking like keyword spam. It is a hard balance to strike. It's a hard balance to strike on every page and every keyword, but that is the challenge. Try and get it right. Try and make it helpful. Try and make it useful. Don't overdo it.
Yeah, so Nisha asked the question, says now in the chat, also I've been told that I should use about 2% keywords and not 3%. Is it that precise?
No, use whatever makes sense. Use our bullets as a guideline for writing stuff that's on topic and about right. If you're looking at specific percentages, you're already doing it wrong because you're optimizing for some kind of theoretical system rather than trying to help your users. Help your users. That is what Google will rank and reward. That is why people will link to you. That is the kind of content that Google wants to surface.
All right, that is a very clear answer. So let's go to a question about structured data. Can you speak about how to formulate structured data for a simple website focused on an author or an artist? A website more for information than for commerce.
That's really interesting. So our stuff out the box should be fine. There's an interesting choice of whether you set the configuration workout. Do you represent an organization, like the company that's responsible for the website, or is it about that artist? And actually, that's a really good use case for that. This website is about John Smith, the artist. And then you've got pages that are articles and posts and pages about the stuff that you make. Interestingly, the commerce side is quite hard. It's hard, for example, to describe a product in Schema without implying that you sell it. And all of Google's testing tools and validation tools will say, but this doesn't have a price. And you're like, well, I just want to talk about a product. So there is a bit of an edge case where you're information only, where you might struggle a little bit, but look through the stuff we output. I should have mentioned as well, we have a whole bunch of add-on plugins like Yoast SEO for WooCommerce. We have a news extension. We have a video extension. They all also output schema, an additional schema, and integrate interoperably. So it might be worth looking at those as well. You could do something with WooCommerce and adapt the schema to have it set up to use products for paintings, for example, but not have prices and stuff. That's definitely doable, but you're going to hit your head against some of the validation tools.
Yeah, and I think as you're saying this, Nathan is asking exactly that in the chat. What about artists that are vendors? So then setting up WooCommerce would definitely be a good use case.
Yeah, I would do it using WooCommerce. Use our plugin. You could configure each of the vendors as a manufacturer, which comes out in the schema. You can play with that. There's lots of toys there.
All right. If I use the classic editor, Eva asks, can I also use the structured data, like a step-by-step guide or FAQ?
Nope. We've only built those blocks for the block editor because of the way it works. We have to have one of the things the block editor does in the background, it makes it very easy for us to extract and parse and manage that content in a way that's quite hard with the classic editor. The classic editor is just a lump of code, whereas the block editor, we can interrogate individual blocks and pull bits out. We need to do that to get the context we need to construct the schema. It is a nightmare to do and build and maintain that with the classic editor. I said this earlier, I said it again, you cannot stay on the classic editor. It is a death sentence. If all you want to do is write poetry that nobody will ever find or read, fine. If you want to compete, to be found and to be visible in Google against competitors who are aggressive, they're spending time and money and energy, they're creating, they're crafting, they're taking advantage of the toys, you have to use the best technology available to do it. I know there's a change in workflow. I know it's new and scary and different, and it's certainly not a perfect product, but you have to take that leap. You really do. I'm sorry.
And I know for a fact that there is an amazing course on how to use the block editor in WordPress that is for free and available under this green button.
Oh, so like we planned it.
Yeah, well, we didn't even, but we have a course available on Gutenberg, so to help you overcome that initial fear. Nice. And don't be scared to hire a developer to help you make that change. All right, so Amanda asks, how once we make these changes, how long does it take to be crawled and become active in the results?
Very interesting question. It depends on your site and on the page. For a big popular site, minutes, maybe. If your site is not so popular and not so big, maybe days, maybe weeks. It kind of happens in line with all the other systems, so it really depends. Also might change by pages. You could be a small site which gets an incredibly popular page, and it might happen in minutes. It's all about how popular you already are in Google and how quickly they come and crawl and revisit. You can maybe try and accelerate that. There is a tool in Google Search Console where you can submit a URL and say, please come crawl this again. And they do have a whole bunch of reporting for places they've discovered structured data and validating it. Worth going and plugging a page into that and seeing what it says.
Let me see if I can do two things at a time, which is talking and typing.
Ambitious. Usually
doesn't work. But I think this is the link that you were referring to.
That's cool. So there's that. So that's the rich results test, which will validate. And so there is also a tool within Google Search Console to submit a URL. Play with both. Hit all the buttons. See what it says.
All right. Next question is also slightly more general SEO question. Is it still true linking your keyword in a WordPress post hurts your SEO instead of helping it?
I think it's a bit more complex than that. So there is a challenge. Part of having a good site structure and managing your content strategy is having a really clear vision on this page is targeting this keyword and that page is targeting that keyword. And it's a little soupier than that. And there's always going to be some overlap, but you really want to have that architecture in your mind. So if you've got that and then you start linking to other pages with keywords that they're competing for, you're sending really mixed signals. I think this is my best page for blue widgets, but I'm going to use the word blue widgets and link to my green widgets page. That's weird. And it's potentially confusing for users. It's about keeping things on topic and keeping them focused. So it's not the end of the world. It's not necessarily going to hurt you, but it's probably symptomatic of something weird in your site architecture.
All right. It looks like Stefan has been playing a bit more with structured data already. When you stipulate the organization ID on an article page, do you really need the rest of the organization details listed? Or do you think Google can make the connection itself?
This is such a great question, and it's such a nerdy one, and it's one I spend a lot of time thinking about. So let me take a step back and give some context. The easiest version of schema might just be to say, here is a recipe and it has these calories and these ingredients, and I put that on my web page. And because Google knows that my blog is part of my website and it knows that my website is published by me because I've said that on my homepage, you would think it might join the dots. They are not good at joining those dots, and they have a whole bunch of conflicting standards and information and requirements inside their own schema requirements, which isn't helpful. So you have to say, this is a recipe in an article on a web page on a website published by an organization, because you need to connect the organization to the recipe because it's the publisher. And you have to have that information present in order to make those connections. So we do that all in the background. It's frustrating that they're not smarter, but that's the way it works. But also, Google are not the only consumer of schema. They're one of the biggest ones, but other systems, Microsoft does tons of stuff in schema, not so much in Bing, but behind the scenes in Windows and their other systems. They're not necessarily as good as joining those dots. They don't have Google's index. They don't necessarily know that the schema on your homepage is related to the schema on my recipe page. It's worth describing those relationships in their entirety to make sure that any system digesting that information can take advantage of it. So yes, it is a bit cumbersome, but it's good. and it's nice to describe all of that, and it's wholesome and it makes sense. So yeah, I'm not in a rush to try and take shortcuts on that.
All right. So does that mean that if you put your site in the classy visualization tool, the classyschema.org, and it shows all separate parts, that something's off?
Yeah, that's a great example. So yeah, if it looks like islands of disconnected stuff, you have a problem. You've got over here somewhere, I've got some FAQs, and over here I've got a recipe. They're not connected. They're not telling a cohesive story. You want to be in a position where, like, this organization published this website, etc., etc. You want one cohesive network.
All right. So for those who missed the URL, I'll post it to the chat another time, and that is classyschema.org/visualization.
Nice.
All right. Jono, are the Yoast SEO plugins just as capable as the plugins Schema Pro, etc.? And will the plugins collide if both are installed?
Good question. So there are many plugins that allow you to write your own schema, and they range from things where you pick from drop downs and inject stuff and it's handled through a nice interface, to just text inputs where you write your own schema from scratch. Hi, Tony in the chat. Tony is the author of Classy Schema and a schema expert and rockstar. Good to have you here. So you can use any of those third parties. Some of them will definitely collide and make a mess. Some of the ones where you can write your own code, you could use to write stuff that interacts nicely with ours. In fact, our developer documentation has a whole bunch of guidelines on exactly how you should integrate. We've deliberately defined an approach which is quite open and permissive to people integrating. However, you really, really need to know your stuff if you're going to try and do that manually, and it really, really needs not to be wrong. You might be better using our API and doing a little bit of PHP to write something that integrates much more neatly. There aren't many scenarios where you really want to be using multiple plugins to do this, because inevitably they're going to have different opinions on approach and they're going to collide. Might not be the end of the world, but you might invalidate some of your eligibility for certain types of results. I've just seen an excellent question that I'm going to cheat and answer from Magdalene, because we've also forgot to mention that the Yoast SEO local add-on has a huge amount of schema for allowing you to choose what type of business you are. Magdalene says, what about beauty salons? I'm almost certain that beauty salon is a type of local business. It might not be beauty salon specifically, it might be hair and beauty or something, but there is schema for local salons. Install the plugin, configure it, and go and tell Google what type of business you are. That's all doable.
All right. I think actually that beauty salon is schema.
There it is. It's a type of local business. Very nice.
Yep. All right. So let me see. There's an issue with Yoast SEO. I can recommend reaching out to the support team, because they can definitely help you solve problems with the plugin that without looking at your site we won't be able to handle. Now we get to the questions that are upvoted less. So if you see a question that you really would like to see answered, don't hesitate, dive into the ask a question section and upvote. The most upvoted now is it possible to get the slides from this presentation? Well, the good news is it will be available later on so that you can rewatch it. And pause Jono if he speaks too fast.
Yep.
All right. I have Yoast SEO Premium. Can I have someone check my site? Jono, do you have some spare time to check a few sites?
Ping me on Twitter at John Alderson. I will happily take a look. I'm not sure how scalable that is, but yeah, you've made the effort to come and attend and watch me talk. I will repay you with a quick look of your site. Sure.
Wow, I see a lot of upvotes now to that one. The overall answer outside of this workshop would be unfortunately not. We're focusing on SEO for everyone, which means that we have the tools and the courses to serve everyone, but we don't do specific advice, unless obviously you hit up Jono on Twitter. So that would be at Jono Alderson on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll try and get back to all of you, I promise.
You'll have a busy evening. Sorry, Sam. All right. Let me see where the good questions are hiding. I see a very basic question that you might like to answer. What is a breadcrumb?
Oh, that's cool. You'll have seen these when you are navigating a website and you are somewhere deep and dark, 12 pages in. You might get a little trail of links showing you where you are. So it'd be like home, category, subcategory, page 6 of 8, appendix XYZ, subsection C. It's a page component that tells you as a user where the heck you are. I'm almost certain we have an Academy course about this, and it's definitely a key feature of the Yoast SEO plugin. We have a system that allows you to output them into your theme. They are super useful for users because SEO means that good SEO means that people rarely land on your homepage and conveniently journey through your site. More often than not, they will land in the bottom end of somewhere you forgot you even had and be really confused and lost. So it's a really good signposting mechanism, and it's really helpful for Google because it helps them understand and navigate back up through the site. So yeah, breadcrumbs good. And there is a ton of schema for breadcrumbs that we automatically output. You'll have seen this in the Google search results. When you search for pages, it will say category, section, page name. That is breadcrumb schema powering that.
All right. And you mentioned that there's a course on this in the Yoast SEO Academy, and I think that is site structure course that's handling
Nice.
breadcrumbs. A very good question by Ozio. How does Google know the difference between a graph or a chart and a regular image?
Oh, that's really interesting. It really depends on how it's implemented. Images, you can do a bunch of stuff. You can add alt attributes. There's a whole bunch of lesser known HTML that you can add to describe them. And they're really good at kind of extrapolating the context from around the image. We have a blog post about this somewhere about image SEO, and it describes a whole bunch about how they parse the page to try and understand it. Graphs and charts are harder. If they're implemented as kind of raw HTML, Google can generally consume that. Tables are pretty easy. They've got headings and rows and numbers and facts. If it's a whole load of funky complex JavaScript, which many whooshy interactive charts are, it might be much harder. There is a whole bunch of schema for data sets. We don't do anything with it natively in Yoast SEO because it's quite complex and it will vary by use case. But if you want to roll your sleeves up, you can describe graphs and charts in structured data and schema. You can put information in for each row and component and value. Might take a bit of time to integrate, but they get really good real estate in the search results, especially in places like Google Scholar. There's a whole search results system for scientific results and for maths questions and homework helpers. That sort of space is quite interesting to compete in.
All right. I have a fun question, and this is also a bit more in-depth by Jan. Would you categorize a shop search results page as a collection page?
Nice. Yes, except there is also schema for search results page, which I think is a more specific type of collection page, or is it a separate one? We do this automatically in Yoast SEO anyway. We spent a whole bunch of time looking at this. All of your archive pages and term taxonomy archives and category indexes are all collection pages. Your search page is a search results page. If your theme is set up weirdly and doesn't do that automatically, search results page is one of the options you can select in our schema tag, and you can put that in manually. So yeah, great question.
All right. There was another question that I saw here. Yes. How do I add people to a site configured as a business site? I could not find an option to add the people, for example, the founders.
So the founders you might need to do manually through the API or through adding another plugin. You would probably still want to add them as users to the site, even if they don't necessarily have a login, because then you can go in and add all of their information in there. And then the only bit of customization you need to do is add a little bit of PHP that says, output a founder property onto the organization and grab the info from this user ID. That would take a reasonably competent developer 30 minutes to do. Yeah, it's worth investing a little bit of effort to get that sort of stuff set up.
Yeah, so I hear you saying that in Yoast SEO there's extra properties you can add to user accounts. Is that correct?
Yes, things like areas of expertise, languages spoken, awards won, honorific prefixes like doctor, and suffixes like university qualifications. And there's 3 or 4 others as well, which I forget at the moment. Things like middle names, dates of birth, places of birth, maybe even a whole bunch that collectively reinforce this idea that Google. And sidestep, Google is really big on expertise and authority and trust at the moment. And one of the big factors that drives that is who wrote this content. Are they trustworthy? So these are attributes which kind of align with that. Again, this doesn't drive rankings. It doesn't directly influence Google, but it certainly helps them understand that, yes, the author of this post actually has a qualification in this topic and some awards and is relevant. Can be really good to join that up.
All right. Then we have a more general SEO question. Can you please explain about tags? And do we still have to input tags? I don't understand tags, is what Jordan says. And a lot of people with him.
Question, but hopefully we've reinforced the idea that you don't need to do any tagging with this. Conventionally, back in the bad old days, technical SEO might mean that you needed to put snippets of HTML into your page code and write bits of JavaScript. You don't need to do any of that. We do all of that for you. It's only if you really want to roll your sleeves up and do custom dev extension-y stuff that you need to be even thinking about tags. For the most part, we just invisibly do stuff in the background. We do have some Yoast SEO Academy stuff about how do web pages work and how do you view the page source and how do you understand the behind-the-scenes stuff versus the front end. That's worth learning and understanding in general, but you don't need it to take advantage of the schema stuff.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, but maybe Jordan can specify in the chat that he's talking about the tags versus categories.
Ah, right. Sorry. So yeah, interesting.
That's slightly shifting topic, but yeah.
Yeah, so we have some Yoast SEO Academy stuff for that as well. That's all about site structure. WordPress comes with tags and categories. It's an interesting architectural decision by WordPress. I find the best way to think about it as categories are drawers in a filing cabinet. Imagine you're storing all of your paperwork. You have big drawers that you pull out. Maybe I put it in the finances drawer. Maybe I put it in the fun drawer. And then in each of those drawers, I have tags. This is the cat section. This is the colors section. And tags classify across all the things. Categories are a way of organizing. You might set your site up completely differently. Rarely do you need to use both. It's a bit weird that WordPress still ships with them. Yeah, go check out our Academy stuff on site structure because that will really help clarify that.
Yeah. So both use cases of the word tags, not confusing at all, have been touched now. Okay.
Great.
There are a few Divi questions, but before we go there, Nisha has another good question. Is it a good idea to do web stories?
Web stories are really cool, I think, as an idea. So if you've not come across these, you almost certainly have come across Instagram and Twitter stories, and increasingly this format, which is turning up on all of the networks, where you have a visual storytelling screen, mostly designed for mobile phones in a portrait format that maybe has one or more slides, which you page through, which maybe expires after a day or so. Web stories is Google's attempt to create that format in an open source way, in a way that isn't in Instagram. I think that's a really interesting idea. I think there are many businesses and websites which could use that as quite a powerful content format. I haven't seen many examples in the wild yet, but there is a WordPress web stories plugin built by the Google team. It does integrate with Yoast SEO. It does do some basic schema and support hours. There's definitely more we could do if there's interest in it. If you haven't looked at it, I'd definitely go check it out. I think it's a really interesting idea. I think it will be quite big in the coming years. If you do anything topical, like news or events or special offers, it might be a really interesting way for you to play with new formats. Tactically, it is a very good way to try and get into Google Discover, which is otherwise quite hard to do with conventional content. So definitely go and explore.
Yeah, and you briefly mentioned that it's built by the Google team. So their integration with Google is, well, just brilliant.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of Divi questions. You already said before that some things might work in Divi, but there's no full integration. So what should people do when they are currently running Divi?
I think sadly the frank answer is maybe wait. I know that we have a Divi integration somewhere on our roadmap. I know that it's not at the top. I don't have any estimates on how long that might take or what it might look like. I know that it's something we aspire to solve. The challenge is that similarly to the classic editor versus the block editor, all of these site editors work in different ways, which means if we want to extract information to do a how-to guide or an FAQ, there's a lot of heavy lifting involved and it all changes over time. Stepping back a bit, my hope is that over time, and our hope collectively, is that these site editors start to use Gutenberg and the block editor as like a centralized API. So it all works in the same way in the background, and the front end is just what interface do I want to drag and drop stuff with. So Divi does not work brilliantly at the moment. It works well enough. Your mileage might vary. You might have some limitations. I know Elementor works really well. I know the block editor works really well. Yeah, definitely your mileage might vary. Sorry. Alternatives are, wait or try and work around it, or use our API to build your own stuff, get your developers to do some stuff, or migrate to something else. Maybe nothing wrong with Divi, but yeah.
Yeah. Or put as much pressure on Divi as you do on us.
Yes, I mean, there's no reason they can't do this. Again, like all our APIs are designed to allow things to be interoperable with us. There's no reason their developers couldn't do that heavy work. Yeah, go kick them. Yeah.
And don't stop kicking us, because although Yoast isn't here, I know he'll be listening in. So, he's still our chief product officer. So, responsible for making those decisions. All right. With that, I think we've reached the end of our full hour. We're up to the full hour, which means that we're going to say our goodbyes. If you haven't yet, near the top of your screen, is the follow button, and here at the bottom is the register for the free Yoast SEO Academy. Jono, thank you so much for all the information. Thanks for answering so many questions. Unfortunately, more questions came in than we could answer, so we may have to do this again sometime.
Oh, okay.
If you want to see more of Jono, don't forget to sign up for our monthly SEO news webinar. We'll have a special edition near the end of this month. So, hope to see you again then.
Thank you, Taco. Thank you, audience. Thank you, everyone. Those were some great questions. We'll catch you later. Yeah, go check out Yoast Academy. Go sign up, do the things. See you later.
Bye-bye.